The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Kensington Palace, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. Kate Middleton stood in the drawing room, her hands trembling slightly as she held a cup of tea that had long grown cold. The weight of recent events pressed heavily on her shoulders, and she found herself staring out at the perfectly manicured gardens without really seeing them. It had been 3 weeks since the diagnosis. 3 weeks since their world had been turned upside down with news that no family ever wants to hear. The doctors had been gentle but direct, explaining the situation with clinical precision that somehow made it feel both more real and more surreal at the same time. Cancer. The word hung in air like a dark cloud that refused to dissipate. Charles had been remarkably strong through it all, maintaining his composure in public while dealing with the private turmoil that came with such devastating news. As the king, he understood that his personal struggles could not overshadow his duties to the nation. But Kate could see the fear in his eyes during quiet moments, the way his hands shook when he thought no one was looking, and how he would sometimes pause mid-sentence as if the weight of everything had suddenly caught up with him. The palace had been a flurry of activity since the announcement. Medical specialists coming and going, security briefings, and carefully worded statements being drafted and redrafted. Everyone was trying to maintain some sense of normalcy while dealing with anything but normal circumstances. The children had been told, of course, but in age-appropriate ways that tried to balance honesty with hope. Kate found herself thinking about her own journey into this family. When she first married William, she had understood intellectually that she was joining something much larger than herself. But it wasn't until moments like these that she truly grasped the profound responsibility that came with being part of the royal family. Every decision, every emotion, every response was scrutinized not just by the media, but by an entire nation that looked to them for stability and strength. She remembered her early days as a royal, how overwhelming it had felt to suddenly have every gesture analyzed and every outfit discussed in newspapers around the world. Princess Anne had been one of the few people who truly understood what that transition was like, and had lived her entire life in the public eye, had weathered scandals and triumphs, heartbreaks and victories, all while maintaining a dignity and strength that Kate had come to deeply admire. The relationship between Kate and hadn't always been easy, and was known for her no-nonsense approach to royal duties, her sharp wit, and her sometimes intimidating directness. In the early years, Kate had felt somewhat intimidated by her sister-in-law, unsure how to navigate conversations with someone who had such vast experience in royal protocol and public service. But over time, especially after becoming a mother, Kate had come to see a different side of Anne, and had been there for all the important moments. She had offered quiet advice during difficult times, shared knowing looks during tedious public engagements, and had become someone Kate could count on for honest feedback when the pressures of royal life felt overwhelming. There was something deeply comforting about Anne's presence. She was like a steady anchor in the sometimes turbulent waters of royal expectations. Now, with Charles facing the biggest challenge of his life, Kate found herself thinking about all the conversations she had shared with and over the years, and had always been fiercely protective of her family, sometimes appearing stern or unapproachable to outsiders. But those who knew her well understood that beneath that exterior was someone who loved deeply and worried constantly about the people she cared about. The sound of footsteps in the hallway broke Kate from a reverie. She turned to see William approaching, his face showing the strain that they were all feeling. He looked older somehow, as if the weight of his father's illness had aged him overnight. They had been supporting each other through this difficult time, but Kate could see that he was struggling with feeling helpless in the face of something that couldn't be fixed with determination or royal influence. "Any word from the doctors today?" Kate asked softly, though she already knew the answer from William's expression. "Nothing new," William replied, running a hand through his hair. "Father is resting. The treatment is going as well as can be expected, but it's still too early to know." His voice trailed off, unable to finish the sentence that held so many fears and uncertainties. Kate set down her cold tea and moved to embrace her husband. They stood there in silence for a moment, drawing strength from each other's presence. Outside, life continued as normal. Tourists gathered at the palace gates. Traffic moved through London streets, and people went about their daily routines unaware of the personal drama unfolding behind palace walls. "And wants to see you," William said quietly. "She's in the blue sitting room. She seems different today, more emotional than usual." Kate nodded, understanding immediately what he meant, and was not known for showing her emotions publicly. And, even in private, she tended to be more reserved about her feelings. If she was showing signs of being emotional, it meant that the situation was affecting her more deeply than she was letting on to most people. As Kate made her way through the familiar corridors of the palace, she thought about what she might say to Anne. They had shared many conversations over the years, but this felt different. This wasn't about royal protocol or public appearances or even family gossip. This was about facing the very real possibility of losing someone they all loved deeply. The blue sitting room was one of Anne's favorite spaces in the palace. It was smaller and more intimate than many of the formal rooms, decorated in soft blues and creams that created a calming atmosphere, and was sitting by the window, looking out at the same gardens that Kate had been staring at earlier. She turned when Kate entered, and for the first time in all the years Kate had known her, and looked truly vulnerable. "Kate," and said simply, her voice softer than usual, "Thank you for coming." "Of course," Kate replied, taking a seat across from Anne. "How are you holding up?" And was quiet for a long moment, and Kate could see her struggling to find the right words. This was someone who was accustomed to always knowing what to say, who had spent decades giving speeches and handling difficult conversations with grace and confidence. But this was different. This was personal in a way that no amount of royal training could prepare someone for. "I keep thinking about when Charles and our children," and began slowly. "People often focus on the fact that we're royals, but before all of that, before the duties and the protocols and the public expectations, we were just siblings. He was my big brother who would sneak extra biscuits from the kitchen and share them with me during long, boring state functions." Kate listened quietly, understanding that and needed to share these memories, needed to connect with the person Charles was beyond his role as king. "He always protected me," and continued, her voice growing slightly hoarse with emotion. "When the press was particularly harsh, when public criticism felt overwhelming, Charles would always find a way to make me laugh or remind me that we were in this together. He taught me how to handle the pressure, how to find purpose in service even when it felt thankless." The room fell silent, except for the soft ticking of an antique clock on the mantelpiece. Kate could see tears forming in Anne's eyes, something she had never witnessed before. It was a profound reminder that beneath all the titles and protocols and public personas, they were simply a family dealing with an unimaginable situation. "I don't know how to help him," and admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've spent my entire life being strong, being the one others could count on. But I don't know how to be strong enough for this." Kate felt her own emotions rising as she watched this strong, dignified woman grapple with feelings of helplessness. It was a reminder of how deeply illness affects not just the patient, but everyone who loves them. The uncertainty, the fear, the desperate wish to do something, anything, to make things better. "You help him by being exactly who you are," Kate said gently. "By being his sister, by being there, by letting him know that he's not facing this alone." And looked at Kate with an expression of gratitude mixed with profound sadness. Sometimes I wonder if we've all forgotten how to just be human in the midst of all our royal obligations. But moments like this strip away everything else, don't they? All the ceremonies and protocols become meaningless when you're faced with something like this. Kate nodded, understanding completely what it meant. The royal family lived their lives in a very public way, always conscious of their image and their duties. But illness didn't care about titles or traditions. It was a great equalizer that reduced everyone to their most basic humanity. I've been thinking about what I would want to say to him, and continued. If the worst happens, if we don't get the outcome we're all hoping and praying for, I keep thinking about all the conversations we never had, all the times I was too caught up in maintaining royal dignity to just tell him how much he means to me. The weight of Anne's words hung heavy in the room. Kate could see that this was about more than just Charles's illness. It was about regret, about missed opportunities for connection, about the way that royal life sometimes created barriers even between family members who loved each other deeply. It's not too late for those conversations, Kate said softly. He's still here, he's still fighting, and he needs to hear those things now more than ever. And wiped away a tear that had escaped despite her efforts to maintain composure. You're right, of course. It's just, we've spent so many years communicating through formal channels, through official statements and public appearances. Sometimes I'm not sure I remember how to just be his sister. Kate understood this struggle intimately. The royal family operated within a complex system of protocols and expectations that could sometimes make even personal relationships feel formal and constrained. Learning to navigate between public duty and private emotion was an ongoing challenge for all of them. Maybe that's exactly what he needs right now, Kate suggested. Not Princess and the royal who has dedicated her life to public service, but and his little sister who shared those stolen biscuits and inside jokes. A small smile crossed Anne's face for the first time that day. He would probably be shocked to see me being so sentimental. I worked very hard to cultivate a reputation for being practical and unsentimental. But that's not really who you are, is it? Kate asked gently. I've seen how you are with your children, with your grandchildren. I've seen how you light up when you talk about your horses or when you're working with your charities. You're not unsentimental. You're just selective about when and where you show that side of yourself. And consider this for a moment, seeming to weigh Kate's words carefully. Perhaps you're right. Perhaps I've been so focused on being what I thought everyone needed me to be that I've forgotten how to be what my brother needs me to be. The afternoon light was beginning to fade outside, casting the room in a softer, more golden glow. Kate could see that this conversation was helping and work through some of her emotions, but she also sensed that there was more weighing on her sister-in-law's mind. There's something else, isn't there? Kate asked perceptively, and nodded slowly. I've been thinking about legacy. Not the official royal legacy that will be written about in history books, but the personal legacy. The impact we have on each other's lives, the memories we create, the love we share. Charles has given so much of himself to his role as king, just as our mother did before him. But I want him to know that his legacy as a brother, as a father, as a person, that matters just as much. Kate felt deeply moved by Anne's words. It was a reminder that behind all the pageantry and protocol of royal life were real people with real relationships, real fears, and real love for each other. As the two women sat together in the fading light, Kate began to formulate an idea. She thought about all the conversations she had witnessed between Charles and over the years, all the subtle ways they showed their care for each other despite their sometimes formal interactions. She thought about the power of words, especially words that came from the heart at exactly the right moment. And Kate said softly, "What if we found a way for you to share these feelings with Charles? Not in a formal setting or through official channels, but in a moment that's just between siblings," and looked at Kate with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. I'm not sure I would know how to begin such a conversation. Sometimes the most powerful words are the simplest ones, Kate replied. Sometimes it's not about finding the perfect thing to say, but about speaking from the heart and trusting that the love will come through. As their conversation continued into the evening, both women began to understand that they were approaching a moment that would require courage. The courage to set aside royal conventions and speak from a place of pure human emotion. It was a daunting prospect, but also a necessary one. Neither of them knew yet exactly how this moment would unfold, but they both sensed that it was coming. And when it did, it would require them to be not princesses or duchesses, but simply women who love their family and were willing to risk vulnerability in service of that love. The following morning brought with it an unseasonable chill that seemed to settle over the palace like a heavy blanket. Kate woke before dawn, her mind already racing with thoughts of the conversation she had shared with in the previous evening. Something had shifted between them during those quiet hours in the blue sitting room. A deeper understanding had emerged, along with a shared recognition that the time for emotional distance had passed. Charles had undergone another round of treatment the day before, and the medical team had cautiously optimistic things to report about his response. But everyone understood that the road ahead remained uncertain, filled with challenges that couldn't be overcome through royal determination or public duty alone. This was a battle that would require every ounce of strength Charles possessed, as well as the unwavering support of his family. Kate dressed quietly, not wanting to wake William, who had finally managed to fall into a deep sleep after several restless nights. The strain was showing on all of them, but perhaps most visibly on William, who was watching his father fight for his life while simultaneously trying to prepare for the possibility that he might need to step into even greater royal responsibilities sooner than anyone had anticipated. As Kate made her way through the palace corridors, she noticed how different everything felt in the early morning hours. The usual bustle of staff and officials hadn't yet begun, and there was a peaceful quality to the silence that she found both comforting and somewhat melancholy. These were the moments when the palace felt most like a home and least like an institution. She found, and in the small breakfast room that the family used for informal meals, sitting with a cup of coffee that appeared to be untouched, and was dressed in her usual understated but elegant style, but Kate could see the fatigue in her posture and the worry lines around her eyes that hadn't been there a few weeks ago. "You're up early," and observed as Kate entered the room. "Couldn't sleep," Kate admitted, pouring herself a cup of tea from the service that had been left on the sideboard. "I kept thinking about our conversation yesterday," and nodded knowingly. "I haven't stopped thinking about it either. I realized that I've been so focused on being strong for everyone else that I haven't allowed myself to really process what we're all going through." The two women sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. Outside, the palace grounds were beginning to show signs of life as the day's shift of security personnel changed over and the groundskeeping staff began their early morning routines. "I want to tell you something," Anne said suddenly, her voice carrying a weight that made Kate look up from her tea. "Yesterday, when we were talking about Charles and childhood memories, it brought back something I had almost forgotten." Kate set down her cup and gave in her full attention, sensing that what was about to be shared was significant. When Charles was first diagnosed with appendicitis as a young boy, he couldn't have been more than 10. I was terrified, and began, her voice soft with remembered emotion. Not because appendicitis is particularly dangerous when treated properly, but because it was the first time I had ever seen him vulnerable. Up until that point, my big brother had seemed invincible to me, and paused, gathering her thoughts before continuing. "I remember sneaking into his room at the Palace Medical Facility one night, probably against every rule that existed. He was sleeping, but he looked so small and pale in that hospital bed. I sat with him for hours, just watching him breathe, terrified that something might happen to him while I wasn't there." Kate felt her heart clench at the image and was painting, a young girl keeping vigil over her sleeping brother, already understanding the profound responsibility that came with loving someone in their family. When he finally woke up, he saw me sitting there and just smiled and continued. He didn't scold me for breaking the rules or worry about what the doctors would say when they found me there. He just said, "I knew you'd come," as if my presence there was the most natural thing in the world. "That must have meant everything to him," Kate said softly. "It did. But what I realized yesterday is that it meant even more to me. It was the moment I understood that being his sister wasn't just about sharing parents or living in the same house. It was about showing up, especially when showing up was difficult or inconvenient or against the rules." Anne's words resonated deeply with Kate, who had experienced her own version of this realization over the years. The royal family operated under so many constraints and expectations that sometimes the simple act of being present for each other required deliberate effort and courage. I think I've spent too many years since then focusing on the rules instead of on showing up, and admitted. Royal protocol became a way to keep emotions at a safe distance, to maintain appropriate boundaries even with the people I love most. Kate understood exactly what it meant. The royal family lived under constant scrutiny, and maintaining proper decorum had become second nature to all of them. But crisis had a way of stripping away everything that didn't matter, leaving only the essential truth of human connection. "It's not too late to show up now," Kate said gently. "In fact, maybe this is exactly when showing up matters most," and looked at Kate with an expression that mixed gratitude with determination. "You're right. I need to find a way to tell him everything I've been thinking and feeling, but I need to do it in a way that doesn't add to his burden. He's dealing with so much already. What if we created an opportunity?" Kate suggested, an idea beginning to form in her mind. "The doctor said he's well enough for short visits, and I know he's been feeling isolated by all the medical precautions. What if we arrange for a quiet family gathering, something that feels normal and comforting rather than formal or emotionally intense?" And considered this suggestion carefully. That could work. Charles always feels more relaxed when there's a specific purpose or activity to focus on. It gives him a way to be himself without feeling like he's the center of attention. As they continued to discuss possibilities, Kate found herself thinking about all the family gatherings she had observed over the years. Some of the most meaningful moments had happened during seemingly ordinary activities: shared meals, walks in the garden, quiet conversations over tea. Perhaps what Charles needed most right now wasn't grand gestures or profound declarations, but simply the comfort of normal family interaction. "There's something else," and said, interrupting Kate's thoughts. "I want you to know how much your presence in this family has meant, especially during this difficult time. You have a way of helping all of us remember who we are beneath all the royal expectations." Kate felt deeply moved by Anne's words. It hadn't always been easy finding her place in the royal family, and there had been times where she wondered if she truly belonged. But moments like this reminded her that family was about more than bloodlines or titles. It was about choosing to love and support each other through whatever challenges life presented. "We're all just doing our best," Kate replied modestly. "But I'm grateful to be part of this family, especially now when we need each other most. Charles has been particularly grateful for your support," and continued. "He told me yesterday that you and William have found the perfect balance between treating him like a king and treating him like a father and grandfather. That's not an easy balance to strike." Kate nodded, understanding the delicate dance that was required. Charles was still the monarch, with all the responsibilities and dignity that role entailed. But he was also a human being facing a life-threatening illness, and he needed the comfort and normalcy that came from family relationships. The sound of approaching footsteps caused both women to look toward the doorway, where William appeared looking slightly more rested than he had in recent days. He greeted both women with warm but tired smiles and helped himself to coffee from the sideboard. "Any word from the medical team this morning?" he asked, settling into a chair beside Kate. "Nothing yet," Anne replied. "But we were just discussing the possibility of arranging a quiet family gathering for this afternoon. Something low-key that might lift Father's spirits without being too taxing." William's face brightened slightly at the suggestion. "I think that's exactly what he needs. He's been asking about everyone constantly, worrying about how we're all handling things. Seeing the family together and relatively normal might be the best medicine we could offer." As the three of them began planning the gathering, Kate felt a sense of purpose returning. For weeks, they had all been feeling helpless in the face of Charles's illness, unsure how to support him while respecting the medical team's guidelines and his need for rest. But this felt different. This felt like something concrete they could do to show their love and support. I'll speak with the medical team about timing and logistics, William offered. But I think a small tea gathering in the garden room would work well. It's comfortable and private, but it doesn't feel like a sick room. Perfect, and agreed. And I'll make sure we have all of Father's favorite things. Proper tea, those biscuits from the London bakery he loves, perhaps some flowers from the garden. Kate listened to the planning with a growing sense of anticipation mixed with nervousness. She understood that this gathering would provide the opportunity and needed to share her feelings with Charles, but she also knew that such conversations required careful timing and the right atmosphere. And Kate said gently, "Have you thought about how you want to approach the conversation with your brother?" And was quiet for a moment, clearly having given this significant consideration. "I think it needs to be natural, not forced. If the moment arises during our time together, I want to be ready to speak from the heart. But I also don't want to create pressure or make everyone uncomfortable. What matters most is that the words are genuine," William added supportively. Father has always been able to tell when someone is being authentic versus when they're just saying what they think he wants to hear. The morning progressed with a flurry of quiet preparation. Staff members were discreetly informed about the afternoon gathering. The medical team was consulted about timing and duration, and arrangements were made to ensure that the event would feel as normal and comfortable as possible. Kate found herself thinking about the power of family rituals during times of crisis. There was something deeply comforting about maintaining familiar patterns and traditions, even when circumstances were far from normal. The simple act of gathering for tea might seem insignificant to outside observers, but for a family dealing with serious illness, such moments of normalcy could provide crucial emotional anchoring. As the afternoon approached, Kate noticed a shift in Anne's demeanor. The earlier vulnerability was still present, but it was now accompanied by a quiet determination that Kate recognized as Anne's way of preparing for something important. This wasn't the formal, protocol-driven princess and that the public knew, but rather a sister who was ready to step outside her comfort zone for the sake of someone she loved. "I keep thinking about what you said yesterday," Anne told Kate as they made final preparations for the gathering. "About speaking from the heart and trusting that the love will come through. I've spent so many years being careful with my words, considering every possible interpretation and implication. But maybe this is a time for simplicity rather than complexity. Sometimes the most powerful statements are the simplest ones," Kate agreed. "I love you. I'm here for you. We're in this together." Those kinds of truths don't need elaborate explanations or perfect timing. And nodded, seeming to find comfort in Kate's words. "You're right. And if I overthink it, I'll probably end up saying nothing at all, which would be the worst outcome of all." As they prepared to gather the family for the afternoon tea, Kate felt a mixture of anticipation and protectiveness toward Anne. She understood how difficult it was for someone who valued emotional privacy to open themselves up in this way, especially during such a vulnerable time for the entire family. The afternoon sun was streaming through the tall windows of the garden room when the family began to assemble. Charles arrived looking tired but pleased to see everyone together, and Kate could immediately see how much the simple act of being surrounded by family meant to him. There was a lightness in his expression that had been absent for weeks. As they settled around the comfortable seating area with tea and refreshments, Kate watched the family dynamics with new appreciation. This was what they were all fighting for. Not just Charles's health, but the preservation of these moments of connection and love that made everything else meaningful. The conversation began with lighter topics, updates about the grandchildren, amusing stories from recent royal engagements, gentle teasing about William's latest attempts at gardening. Kate could see Charles relaxing more with each passing minute, and she noticed and watching her brother with an expression of deep affection mixed with careful observation. As the afternoon wore on, Kate sensed that and was looking for the right moment to shift the conversation towards something more meaningful. The atmosphere was comfortable and intimate, exactly what they had hoped to create, and Kate could feel the anticipation building towards something significant. The garden room had settled into that perfect afternoon atmosphere, where time seemed to move more slowly and conversations flowed with natural ease. Charles looked more like himself than he had in weeks, animated by stories about his grandchildren's latest adventures and clearly grateful to be surrounded by family rather than medical equipment and worried-looking doctors. Kate watched the scene unfold with a mixture of joy and careful attention. She could see him growing more contemplative as the afternoon progressed, and she sensed that her sister-in-law was gathering courage for the conversation she needed to have with Charles. The challenge was finding the right moment, a pause in the laughter that wouldn't feel forced or artificial. William was sharing a story about George's latest school project, something involving a rather elaborate model of a medieval castle, when Charles interrupted with a gentle laugh. That boy has inherited the family tendency toward overambitious projects, Charles said, his eyes twinkling with grandfatherly pride. I remember when you decided to build that tree house that was going to rival Buckingham Palace in terms of architectural complexity. In my defense, I was 8 and had very grand ideas about what constituted proper royal accommodation, William replied with a grin. And if I recall correctly, you spent an entire weekend helping me with that ridiculous project, even though you probably had a dozen more important things to do. Nothing was more important than that tree house, Charles said simply, and Kate could see the deep love in his expression as he looked at his son. Some of my best memories are of those weekend projects we did together. The tree house, the garden railway, that disastrous attempt at building a boat that definitely did not float. The room filled with warm laughter as everyone remembered the various family projects that had occupied weekends at Highgrove over the years. These are the moments that Kate treasured most about royal family life. The times when titles and protocols faded away and they were simply people who loved each other. "Father," and said softly, and something in her tone caused everyone to turn their attention to her. Kate could see the slight tremor in Anne's hands as she set down her teacup, and she recognized the moment they had all been unconsciously waiting for. "Yes, my dear," Charles replied, his voice gentle and attentive, and was quiet for a moment, and Kate could see her struggling to find the right words. This was someone who was accustomed to speeches and formal addresses, but this conversation required something entirely different. It required vulnerability. "I've been thinking a great deal lately about how rarely we tell each other the things that really matter," and began, her voice steadier than Kate had expected. "We're so good at discussing schedules and duties and public responsibilities, but we don't often talk about how much we mean to each other." Charles's expression softened, and Kate could see that he understood immediately that this was not going to be an ordinary conversation. William reached over to take Kate's hand, and she could feel the emotional weight of the moment settling over all of them. "This illness," and continued, "it's made me realize how much I've taken for granted, how much I've assumed that there would always be time later to say the important things." And Charles started to speak, but she gently raised her hand to indicate that she needed to finish. "Please, let me say this," and said, her voice growing stronger with determination. "I need you to know that you have been the most extraordinary big brother anyone could ask for. Not because you're the king, but because of who you are as a person." Kate felt tears beginning to form in her eyes as she watched this proud, reserved woman open her heart to her brother. The afternoon light seemed to grow softer, as if the universe itself was creating space for this sacred moment. "You protected me when we were children," and continued, "not just from outside criticism or public pressure, but from my own doubts about whether I was strong enough for this life we were born into. You show me that strength didn't mean being unfeeling. It meant caring deeply while still doing what needed to be done." Charles's own eyes were beginning to glisten with unshed tears, and Kate could see him struggling with his own emotions as his sister's words reached him. "When I was going through my divorce, when the press was particularly brutal, and I felt like I was letting the family down, you never once made me feel judged or criticized and said, you just appeared at my door with a bottle of wine and asked if I wanted to talk or if I wanted to sit in comfortable silence. That meant everything to me. You never let the family down, Charles said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. You have always been one of the strongest people I know. That's because you taught me how to be strong, Anne replied. Not through lectures or formal lessons, but by example, by showing me what it looked like to put service before self, to find meaning in duty, to love deeply while maintaining dignity. Kate could feel the profound love flowing between the siblings, and she understood that she was witnessing something extraordinary, a moment of complete honesty and vulnerability between two people who had spent their lives maintaining careful emotional boundaries. I need you to know, and continued, her voice beginning to waver slightly, that watching you fight this illness with such grace and courage has made me proud to be your sister in ways I've never been able to express. You are facing the most frightening thing any of us can face, and you're doing it with the same strength and dignity you've shown in everything else. I don't feel particularly strong most days, Charles admitted quietly. But you are, and insisted. Even when you're afraid, even when you're in pain, even when the uncertainty feels overwhelming, you're still thinking about others, still concerned about how your illness is affecting the family, still trying to fulfill your duties as king. That's not just strength, Charles. That's heroism. The room was so quiet that Kate could hear the gentle ticking of the antique clock on a mantelpiece and the soft rustle of leaves outside the window. Everyone seemed to understand that they were witnessing something profound and sacred. There's something else I need to tell you, Anne said, and Kate could see her gathering courage for what was clearly the most difficult part of this conversation. I need you to know that if the worst happens, if we don't get the outcome we're all praying for, your legacy is secure. Not just as king, but as a brother, as a father, as a grandfather, as a man who spent his life trying to make the world better. Charles closed his eyes for a moment, and Kate could see him struggling to maintain his composure. When he opened them again, they were bright with tears. But more than that, and continued, her voice growing stronger again, I need you to know that you're not fighting this alone. We're all here, we're all with you, and we're not going anywhere. Whatever comes, we face it together. That's what family means. The silence that followed was filled with so much love and emotion that Kate felt as though the very air in the room had changed. She looked around at William, who was wiping away tears, and at Charles, who seemed overwhelmed by his sister's words. And Charles finally said, his voice barely above a whisper, "Thank you. I needed to hear those things more than you could possibly know. I needed to say them," and replied simply. Charles stood slowly and moved away and was sitting. She rose to meet him, and brother and sister embraced with an intensity that spoke of years of unspoken love and worry and pride. Kate watched them hold each other, and she understood that she was witnessing the healing of emotional wounds that had been carried for far too long. "I love you too," Charles whispered to his sister. "I've always been so proud of the woman you became, so grateful for your strength and your loyalty and your unwavering commitment to our family. You have been my anchor in so many storms." As the siblings continued to hold each other, Kate felt William's hand tighten around hers. She looked at her husband and saw her own emotions reflected in his face. Profound love for this family they were part of, gratitude for the courage and had shown, and a deep appreciation for the reminder that love, when expressed honestly and completely, had the power to heal and transform. When Charles and finally separated, both of them were crying openly, but their tears seemed cleansing rather than sorrowful. There was a lightness in both their expressions that hadn't been there before, as if the act of speaking and hearing these truths had lifted a weight that had been carried for too long. "I think," Charles said, settling back into his chair but keeping hold of Anne's hand, "that we should make a promise to each other. No more waiting for the right moment to say the important things. No more assuming that love is understood without being expressed." "Agreed," and said firmly. "Life is too precious and too uncertain to waste time on emotional formality. Kate found herself thinking about her own relationships, about the words she might be holding back out of fear or habit or simple assumption that there would always be time later. Anne's courage had created a ripple effect that was already changing how she thought about expressing love and appreciation to the people who mattered most. "Kate," Charles said suddenly, turning his attention to her with a warm smile, "I hope you know how grateful we all are for the way you've supported this family through this difficult time. Your strength and your wisdom have been gifts to all of us." Kate felt deeply moved by Charles's words, but she also felt compelled to redirect the focus back to what really mattered. "We're family," she said simply. "This is what family does." "Yes," Anne agreed, "but not everyone understands that family is both a gift and a choice. We're born into relationships, but we choose every day how to nurture them, how to show up for each other, how to love each other well." As the afternoon light began to fade outside the garden room windows, the family continued to sit together in the comfortable silence that follows profound emotional sharing. Kate understood that something fundamental had shifted in this room, not just between Charles and but for all of them. The conversation gradually returned to lighter topics, but the undertone had changed. There was a warmth and openness in the exchanges that felt different from before, as if Anne's courage had given everyone permission to be more emotionally honest with each other. Kate found herself thinking about the power of words, how the right words, spoken at the right moment with complete sincerity, could heal wounds and strengthen bonds and create memories that would last long after the immediate crisis had passed. And had given Charles a gift that no medical treatment could provide, the gift of knowing, without any doubt, how deeply he was loved and valued. As the family began to make plans for dinner together, Kate caught Anne's eye and smiled. She could see that her sister-in-law looked lighter somehow, as if the act of speaking her truth had freed her from a burden she had been carrying for years. "Thank you," Anne mouthed silently to Kate, and Kate understood that she was being thanked not just for encouraging this conversation, but for helping Anne find the courage to be vulnerable when vulnerability was exactly what was needed. The afternoon had become something none of them would ever forget, a reminder that love, when expressed completely and honestly, had the power to transform even the most difficult circumstances into moments of grace and connection. 3 months had passed since that transformative afternoon in the garden room, and the palace had slowly begun to feel like home again rather than a medical facility. Charles's treatment had progressed better than anyone had dared to hope, and while the road to full recovery remained long and uncertain, the doctors were cautiously optimistic about his response to treatment. Kate stood in the same drawing room where this journey had begun, but everything felt different now. The morning light streaming through the windows no longer felt harsh or overwhelming. Instead, it seemed to carry with it a sense of possibility and renewed hope. The tea in her hands was still warm, and she found herself actually tasting it rather than simply holding it for comfort. The transformation in the family had been remarkable to witness. Charles had emerged from the worst of his treatment with a new appreciation for the preciousness of each day and a determination to live more intentionally. He had begun sharing more personal stories with his grandchildren, spending longer hours in his beloved gardens, and, most notably, engaging in the kind of honest, emotional conversations that had been rare before his illness, and had perhaps changed the most visibly. The vulnerability she had shown that afternoon had not disappeared with the passing crisis. Instead, it had evolved into a new kind of strength that allowed her to be more authentic in all her relationships. She had begun speaking more openly about her feelings, sharing childhood memories during family dinners, and even showing uncharacteristic displays of affection in public settings. The relationship between the siblings had deepened in ways that surprised everyone who knew them. They had begun taking regular walks together in the palace gardens, often talking for hours about everything from childhood memories to their hopes for the future of the monarchy. Staff members who had worked with the family for years commented on the change in their interactions. There was a warmth and ease that had been present but hidden before the crisis. Kate had found herself thinking often about the conversation she had witnessed between Charles and Anne. She had realized that her own role in facilitating that moment had taught her something profound about the power of creating space for difficult conversations. Sometimes the most loving thing one person could do for another was to encourage them to speak their truth, even when that truth involved risk and vulnerability. The ripple effects of that afternoon had extended throughout the entire family. William had begun having more personal conversations with his father about topics beyond royal duties and public responsibilities. The grandchildren were being included more frequently in family gatherings, creating memories that would sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead. Even the extended family had begun gathering more regularly, as if Charles's illness had reminded everyone that time together was precious and not to be taken for granted. Kate was lost in these thoughts when she heard familiar footsteps approaching. She turned to see and entering the drawing room, looking vibrant and healthy in a way that seemed to reflect inner peace as much as physical well-being. The worry lines that had marked her face during the worst of Charles's illness had softened, replaced by a calm contentment that Kate found deeply reassuring. "Good morning," and said warmly, settling into the chair beside Kate's favorite spot by the window. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" "Absolutely beautiful," Kate agreed, and she meant it in ways that went far beyond the weather. "I wanted to talk with you about something," and said, her tone carrying the kind of gentle seriousness that Kate had come to associate with important conversations. "I've been thinking a great deal about that afternoon when we all gathered for tea, about the conversation Charles and I had." Kate nodded, remembering every detail of that emotionally charged day. "It was an extraordinary moment. I'll never forget watching you find the courage to speak from your heart." "That's just it," and said, leaning forward slightly. "I keep thinking about how close I came to never having that conversation. If his illness had progressed more quickly, if we hadn't created that opportunity, if I had continued to let royal protocol prevent me from expressing what really mattered, I might never have told him those things he needed to hear." Kate could see where this reflection was leading, and she felt a mixture of anticipation and protectiveness for what and might be about to share. "It's made me realize how many other conversations I've been avoiding," and continued. "How many times I've let formality and tradition prevent me from expressing genuine emotions to people who matter to me." "That's understandable," Kate said gently. "We're all taught from a young age to maintain certain boundaries, to express ourselves in appropriate ways. But crisis has a way of showing us what really matters." "Exactly," and agreed. "And what I've realized is that one of the most important conversations I've been avoiding has been with you." Kate felt a flutter of surprise and curiosity. "With me?" and took a deep breath, and Kate could see her gathering the same kind of courage she had summoned that afternoon with Charles. "Kate, I owe you an apology. More than that, I owe you an acknowledgement that I've never properly expressed." "And you don't owe me anything," Kate began, and held up her hand gently. "Please, let me say this," and requested, echoing the words she had used with Charles. "When you married William, I thought I understood what that meant for our family. I thought I was prepared for the changes that would come with having a new member, particularly someone who hadn't grown up in this unique environment." Kate listened carefully, understanding that this was going to be as meaningful for her and as the conversation with Charles had been. "But I wasn't prepared for how much you would teach us all about being a family," and continued, her voice growing stronger with conviction. "I wasn't prepared for the way you would help us remember that beneath all the titles and protocols, we're simply people who love each other." Kate felt deeply moved by Anne's words, but she also felt compelled to deflect some of the credit. "I think we all learned those lessons together. Your brother's illness showed all of us what really matters." "That's generous of you to say," and replied with a smile, "but it's not entirely accurate. You were creating space for emotional honesty long before Charles became ill. You were the one who suggested that afternoon gathering. You were the one who encouraged me to speak from my heart. You were the one who helped me find the courage to be vulnerable when vulnerability was exactly what was needed. and paused for a moment, seeming to gather her thoughts before continuing with what was clearly the most important part of her message. But more than any specific action you took, it was your way of being in this family that made the difference, and said, "You never try to change us or force us to be more emotional than we were comfortable being. Instead, you simply modeled what authentic family relationships could look like, and you created safe spaces for the rest of us to choose our own level of openness." Kate felt tears beginning to form in her eyes as she listened to Anne's words. She had often wondered if she truly fit into this family, whether her more emotionally expressive nature was appropriate for the royal environment. "I need you to know," and continued, "that watching you navigate the balance between respecting our traditions and encouraging genuine connection has been one of the greatest gifts Charles's illness brought us. You helped us understand that we could honor our heritage while still being fully human with each other. And that means more to me than I can express," Kate said softly. "There were times when I worried that I was too emotional, too informal, too different from what this family was used to." "Your difference was exactly what we needed," and replied firmly. "We had become so practiced at maintaining appropriate emotional distance that we were losing touch with each other as people. You reminded us that love doesn't diminish dignity, it enhances it." The two women sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both processing the depth of what had been shared. Kate found herself thinking about the journey she had taken from the young woman who had married into the royal family to the person she was today. More confident in her place, more understanding of the unique challenges this family faced, and more appreciative of the strength required to live life in the public eye. "There's something else I want to tell you," and said, interrupting Kate's reflections. "Charles asked me to share this with you because he wanted to make sure you understood the impact you've had on him personally." Kate looked at him with curiosity and attention. "He told me that during the darkest moments of his treatment, when he was most afraid and most uncertain about the future, he would think about that afternoon conversation we had, and explained, not just because of what I said to him, but because of the role you played in making it possible. I just suggested that you create an opportunity," Kate said modestly. "You did much more than that," and corrected. "You recognized what I needed to say before I understood it myself. You saw that Charles needed to hear those words, and you helped me find the courage to speak them. That afternoon became a turning point for both of us, not just in terms of our relationship with each other, but in our understanding of what this family could be at its best." Kate felt overwhelmed by the significance of what Anne was sharing. She had known that the conversation between Charles and Anne had been meaningful, but she hadn't fully understood the lasting impact it had created. "Charles wanted you to know," and continued, "that your quiet suggestion that afternoon gave him more strength than any medical treatment could have provided. Knowing that he was loved completely, without reservation or condition, that became a source of healing that sustained him through the most difficult parts of his treatment. I'm so grateful that conversation happened," Kate said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm grateful that you found the courage to speak your truth, and I'm grateful that Charles was able to hear it." "We're all grateful," Anne replied, "but mostly we're grateful for you, for the way you love this family, for the way you help us love each other better, for the way you show us that vulnerability and strength can coexist." As the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, the two women continued to sit together in the drawing room, both understanding that they had just shared another transformative conversation. Kate realized that Anne's words had given her something she hadn't known she needed, validation that her place in this family was not just secure, but valuable. "I have one more thing to tell you," and said with a smile that carried a hint of mischief. "Charles has been making plans for a family celebration when he receives his final medical clearance. Nothing formal or public, just a gathering for the people who matter most. He specifically asked me to tell you that he wants it to be the kind of event where people feel free to speak from their hearts." Kate laughed, understanding the reference, and feeling deeply touched by Charles's thoughtfulness. "I think that sounds perfect. He also said to tell you that you're in charge of creating the right atmosphere for emotional honesty," and added with a grin, Apparently, you've become a family expert on facilitating meaningful conversations. I'm honored by the responsibility, Kate said, already beginning to imagine the possibilities for such a gathering. As and prepared to leave for her morning appointments, she paused at the door and turned back to Kate. Thank you, she said simply, for everything you've given this family, but especially for showing us that the most powerful words are often the quietest ones, spoken at exactly the right moment with complete sincerity. Kate watched and leave, feeling a profound sense of gratitude for the journey they had all taken together. The crisis that had threatened to tear their family apart had instead revealed the strength of the bonds that connected them. They had learned that love, when expressed honestly and completely, could heal wounds, strengthen relationships, and create lasting memories that would sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead. The morning light continued to stream through the windows, but now it felt like a blessing rather than an intrusion. Kate finished her tea, still warm, still comforting, and began to plan the celebration that would honor not just Charles's recovery, but the transformation of an entire family that had learned to speak the language of the heart.